extremely grateful. And what I did was I have written something down to read, which is a little contrary to my normal way of doing it, but I want to make sure that I got everything along here in the greetings of you. So, and as we have a lot of new, also newcomers, I think it would be a great idea that I just made a short presentation of you.
Okay.
So what I'm starting to say, your credentials are endless. So therefore, I will introduce you with words that you have written on your web page. I am a board certified psychiatrist who has spent the majority of my career awakening mental health and sharing the understanding that there's just one cause and one cure for mental illness. To further illuminate the audience, I would like to add that it is stated that you have shared the principles within your psychiatric practice for more than 35 years at the time of your retirement from clinical psychiatry in 2018. You were mentored personally for over 26 years by Sydney Banks. And I would like to add another personal note. I still remember our conversation on a meet and greet in Salt Spring Island.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, where your wife and yourself presented your understanding and experiences with the principles in your work as mental health pioneers within the fields of psychology and psychiatry, together with Chip and Elsie. And I can still hear, and this is very important for me, I can still hear your words emphasizing the importance of the purity of the message of the principles. I didn't understand it fully at the time, but if you have once discovered the disappearance of magic with the innocent, almost unnoticeable change from heart to head communication, you will forever be aware of any relapse. So from a Danish perspective, I would like to thank you for your contribution to our latest book, and also for showing up tonight to talk about mental health, which is more relevant than ever during these rather trying times. But before passing the word up to you, I have asked Mette Louise to give you a briefing on her practice as a mentor and practicing psychologist, just to give you a feel of what is going on in Denmark. And with these words, I will wholeheartedly welcome you here in this community, and I will leave the words to Mette Louise. But thank you again, Bill.
Thank you, Christian.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Mette Louise.
I'm sorry to take your time, so I'll do this short. I think Christian got curious of our work, what it's like these days. So he was kind to ask me. I'm a psychologist, and I came across this understanding back around 2012 or 13 via my husband suddenly becoming unusually happy. So for a while I didn't ask him what it was, because I thought the reality I lived in was that I was the psychologist, so I was supposed to know stuff. But when I did, he said 3 words. It's about how thought creates feeling, and my whole world and life shifted from there. So I couldn't get out there fast enough starting to share this. So I think I've had more than 8,000 conversations around this interesting subject so far. And right now I have a private practice sharing these principles, sharing this understanding of our common nature and innate health. It's called Intact. I have a psychologist colleague, Grete. I'm so grateful, because in the beginning I was the only psychologist. So when we were 2 in Denmark, knowing this, I was really grateful. My husband is also working there, and for the first time we have somebody doing her internship from the university, psychologist student, who came across this. I wrote in 17, I wrote a book called I can't even remember what it's called, Your Self-Healing Mind, an Introduction to Your Own Innate Health. And she happened to read that, and she really fell into this understanding. So she's doing her internship with us now, which we're really grateful for.
Wow.
And we also have an education. We're a practitioner program. And for the first time, we have, or that's not true. Last year we did it, one in Denmark and one in Greenland. And we happened to have a Greenlandic psychologist there, which was the first psychologist at the program. And this year we have 2 psychologists.
Wow.
And I'm so grateful. And then we have this, because of the COVID-19, we did an 8-week online program called Rolig Nu in Danish, which means easy now. And at the same time, it also means quiet now. We thought that we liked that name. And we crossed our fingers that maybe 20 people or something like that would join us. And we're so happy. We're more than 90 people.
Wow.
And it has been, we just finished just right before this call. And I'm so grateful for having hung out with so many people and looking in this direction at the same time. It's been so great, the insights and the feeling we've shared. So that's what we're doing.
That's beautiful.
Over here.
Oh, it's so beautiful. So beautiful. Yeah. It's wonderful.
Yeah. So I won't take more of your time. I'm really enjoying and looking forward to listen to you.
Well, I could just become a listener very easy and just listen to you. I was going to grab a couple of things. No, that's really beautiful. It's, 37 years ago, there was, I don't know, 25 or 30 of us, Now there's tens of thousands, if not more, all around the world. It's been really remarkable to see it happen, and like we are with our own personal lives, we certainly have thoughts at times that we wanted to move faster, just like we all want to see more now. And instead of being grateful in the moment for the incredible journey that we're blessed to participate in. Yeah. So no. So talk to me, Christian or somebody, as to what you would like me to share, because I'm more than happy to, share in whatever direction is helpful.
Well, I would personally love to hear some of your experiences within your psychiatric practice and in your psychiatric work, if that is possible.
Sure. I have recently, and when you put something out there, you kind of are putting your foot in the sand, so to speak. But I'm really dedicating January 1st to October 1st, a 9-month period, as a 9-month period to do my best to document my 37-year journey. The first thing anybody asks you to do when you're going to write a book is, who are you writing it for? Are you writing it for the general population, or are you writing it for the psychiatrists and psychologists and physicians? And I find myself thinking that I want to write a book that for everyone, that is for everyone, because as Sid said, everyone is seeking enlightenment, whether or not they are aware of it. And to me, that means that everyone in their heart is trying to find their way home to a place of peace that you just talked about, a place of happiness, a place of contentment. And oftentimes you see people who are struggling in that, as I was for 41 years of my life, doing the best that I knew how with what I saw, because we only see what we see when we see it. So for 9 months, in 9 months, I hope to deliver a baby book of some sort. And we'll see what happens. But one of the thoughts, Christian, that came to me was to share, as I did and I'm not gonna repeat all that's in the chapter, because you certainly can read that in the book, and most of you probably have. But yeah, I'm glad to share a little bit kind of the journey. I think I may even have the book divided into sections of the different parts of my journey over the last 37 years. He's passed away now. There was a famous baseball player and manager in the United States named Yogi Berra. And he would say things that other people would really think were funny, but he wasn't trying to be funny. It's just the way he saw things. And one of his sayings was, if you come to a fork in the road, take it. Well, you really don't have a choice, right? But he would also say things like that. That restaurant is so busy, no one goes there anymore. Or he'd say batting is a baseball player. Batting is 50% physical and 90% mental. Well, that's 140%. Anyway, so I've come across many forks in the road, and I've taken a number of them. That actually, I have a wonderful relationship with my oldest daughter. But one time when we were moving from Florida to Iowa to a new position where I was supposedly going to have a 20-bed unit for juvenile delinquents with drug and alcohol problems, she got so upset that we were moving. She said, I feel like I'm a big frog hopping around the world. But she got over it and she's fine. The first thing that happened for me, as I said in the chapter, was in April Fool's Day of 1983, when I met Mr. Banks, and I saw him in a conference in San Francisco. And it was a Friday evening and a Saturday and Sunday. And I was 41 years old at the time. And I'll go through this very quickly because to get to the clinical stuff, but I had gone in and out of depression for 21 years. I had seen 6 different psychiatrists, never been hospitalized, and was on medicines only for a short period of time. They never seemed to help me much. But here I was, a psychiatrist with board certified in psychiatry and designated a mental health professional, which was really a misname because I had 800 lectures on mental illness and medications and 0 lectures on mental health. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. I really should have been designated as a mental illness specialist because that's what I was. And as I sat there that evening, April Fool's Day, 1983, within 30 minutes, I knew that this welder with a 9th grade education knew at least 1,000 times more about mental health than I did. And that was very humbling, but it was also very hopeful. For the first time in my life, I really felt hope that I could be at peace, that I could stop the struggles that I'd been in with my own thinking for 41 years. And I saw that my depression was not because of my genetic load from my mother's side, or both my parents had had alcoholism. Not my mother struggled with alcohol, after my brother went off to Vietnam and as a helicopter pilot, and he came back 1 out of every 3 in his company. It was 1/3 came back. But she turned to alcohol to try to relieve her anxiety. I had significant alcoholism on my father's side, not my father, but his brothers. And I had a grandfather on my mother's side that actually took his life. So I had thought that it was from that and a whole bunch of other things that I made up, that my depression was from things from the outside. And as I sat there that evening, the first thing that I saw was what has been mentioned before, that it was my thinking, what I'd been doing with this power and gift of thought for 41 years that had been creating my pain. And that the stress that I felt from everyday life was not from things external to me. It was from inside of me. And some people have thought that must have been upsetting to me. And I said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Upsetting? Here, I thought that my depression was being caused by things that I had absolutely no control over. Other people's behavior, other people's verbal and actions, and even the thoughts that got triggered into my head by just reflection of past experience. To find that the locus of control was truly within me, even if at first I didn't know how to do that. It was if I saw that my right-sided headache had been coming from 41 years of hitting myself in the head, not from anybody else hitting me in the head. And even though I initially didn't see how to stop doing it, it gave me hope that I might be able to at least learn how to do it a little less often and a little less hard. And I even entertained the possibility that it might stop. I might stop doing it. And I got filled with, even as I think about it now, I get choked up, I get filled up, because it was like having struggled inside of a cave or a cave-in for 41 years and suddenly having photons of light reach me in the cave. And know that I was connected to the light. I often think of the light coming in from the outside, and that certainly was my initial experience. But then I realized what was happening was not that light was coming in from the outside. It was that I was allowing a crack in my thinking, and the light inside of me was coming out and filling me up on the way out. There's a beautiful song by Leonard Cohen, who passed away about a year ago, I think. It's called The Anthem. And if you haven't seen it on YouTube, I encourage you to watch the live edition on, it was London in 2008. Has anybody ever seen that video? Can I see any hand? Okay. And it's beautiful. And I was a Navy flight surgeon. I got drafted into the Navy 2 years after graduated from medical school. And I served with the pilots for the training squadron for 2.5 years as a doctor to them and their families. And even though they gave me an opportunity to actually solo the plane after our 20 hours of training in a T-28. And I figured I had about 8 in 10 chance of coming back alive. Even though they were ready to let me go, I had a sense that, yeah, maybe about 1 in 5 I don't come back, and so I said no, thank you. But I've always loved aviation. I love watching birds fly in squadrons. And in this video called The Anthem, you have these magnificent birds flying in slow motion. But the chorus is, everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in. And when I heard that a few months ago, I thought, God, there's truth there, but it's not the whole truth. And I went to my intellect, and if my intellect doesn't give me the answer within 2 minutes, I know not to keep going there. It doesn't know it. So I went to sleep, and I woke up and I went, oh, okay, thank you. Because I saw everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets out. That's how the light gets out. So the first thing that happened was for myself, in answer to Christian's question. It was a hope that I had, but that has ramifications clinically, because as Sid says, you can only give away what you have. Can't. I've tried to give much of my life. I used to try to give from an empty basket. And even after I met Sid, there were many times when I got going too fast and went much faster than the speed of life and didn't take care of myself. And life would slam me on my back in one way or another with a kidney stone or back pain or some health problem, and say, listen, you really learn slowly, don't you? I tell people I learn slowly but forget quickly. Anybody else identify with that? So I felt tremendous hope, and one of the 37 years has been really remarkable. But the first thing that happened is that I quit my job I gave 2 weeks notice very shortly after I met Sid. I gave a 2 weeks notice to my job, and was headed to have a 10-month fellowship with Dr. Roger Mills and Dr. Rick Suarez and a woman named Dr. Kim Cadu, who were studying with Mr. Banks, and it was all the way across on Florida, from California to Florida. And on the way there, we stopped at our home in the middle of the United States in Illinois. And my father and I had spent a lot of my 41 years at that time in conflict with each other. And we'd had good times, not to say we didn't, but it seemed like we could sit down to watch a ball game on television, and there could be a 50% chance that one of us would walk out of the room before the game was over because of something that we saw differently, and we're so invested in being right that we forgot how much we loved each other. And when I came back home after meeting Sid and spending some time with Dr. George Pransky, something started to happen inside of me where I started a process that I think still is continuing of experiencing what true love is, that it's not of this world. I think Mama Lila in Second Chance says it's a living, breathing essence that the wise can pick at will and use as needed. And when I saw my father, we were coming across the country in 1983, I looked at him and I saw nothing but a remarkable human being not perfect like all of us, but a remarkable person. And I truly loved him unconditionally. I felt it in my heart. And what was amazing was that in the next 3 days, even though nothing was ever spoken, I know that he felt it because he told me stories about his early life, many, many stories over the next 3 days that he never told me in 41 years. And long story short, my wife and I, her family was 50 miles away and from my folks's, and we stayed there for a year. We called up Dr. Mills and Dr. Suarez, and we waited for an entire year. And I went to a state hospital that had 700 patients, 300 mentally ill, some acutely mentally ill, and many chronically mentally ill, and another 350 patients with developmental disorders and autism. And here's what's amazing, folks. I was the only psychiatrist there, except for a doctor who sat in the front office. All of the doctors that cared for those 700 patients were family doctors that had taken courses in psychiatric medications. So the real care came from psychologists and caring psychologists and social workers and mental health workers. And so I was each day I would go in and they would give me a list of consults to go see. And one of them I ended up doing that group, which I said I talked, I sat as quietly as possible and tried to make it as my experience was when I did the last chapter there. And I'll mention it briefly because one can be read, where the man had been in the state hospital for 47 years with the diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia. And there were 21 others in the group. And people asked me one time, why did this one man here and have this dramatic awakening? And why did the other 21? As far as I know, I don't know if later they might have, because I've seen that so often in my last 37 years that it's like you give an injection, and for some people it's a year later or 2 years later or 3 months later, they suddenly wake up. So I don't know if any of those other people that had the diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia in that group, I've seen a number of people wake up since then over 37 years. But that man did. He started laughing hysterically as described. And when he finally calmed down, he basically said to me, he said, "Doctor, while you were talking, I saw that I had made myself crazy for 47 years with my own thinking." Wow. Now, I saw that as I sat with Sid, that I had been making myself crazy, not by our standards in society that he had, because he was in a state hospital and I was a practicing psychiatrist. But internally, I had felt craziness a lot of my life, created by my own thinking. What was remarkable was that Herb was his name. Herb not only saw that he had been doing it, he saw something that I had not seen yet at that point. He said, "I see that I'd been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years, and I don't have to do it anymore." Wow. And I wish you could have been in that room with me, folks, because you would not have questioned him. There was a level of clarity and certainty that filled that room it's when you wish somebody was surreptitiously filming you and recording you, because now I'd have a recording. And that's so outside of our belief system that could occur. And he his whole physiology changed so fast. He had a list of medications of probably, I don't know, 10 to 12 medications that I had to, as quickly as possible, taper him off of them, because there was a danger in stopping some of them totally, but I had to move quickly because his physiology was changing so fast as he found a level of peace and stopped spending 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day dysregulating his physiology, that I had to move very quickly. And I was able to get him off all medicines in about 6 weeks. And then the head of the hospital, who still couldn't believe, the psychiatrist, he couldn't believe after 47 years that this man could be healthy. And I'd say, well, talk to the nurses, talk to the social workers, talk to whoever you have to. But I think it would be, I don't know if I use the word criminal, but it would be really, really unfair to keep this man here if he does not need to be here. And he went, and I had a 3-year follow-up, as I say in the book, and he was living in an apartment and going down to the senior center, and he had a girlfriend, and they were dancing and playing cards all day and going to movies, he and his buddies, and he was as healthy a 70-year-old man that there was at 3-year follow-up. So what happened after that? Well, the next thing was that I saw, I would catch myself starting to get angry, and I saw that I was the one doing it. It wasn't what the person said. I started seeing that the anger machine was on my hip. And when people didn't do what I wanted them to do or talk the way I wanted them to talk in the way I wanted them to, whether it was my kids or my wife or my colleagues, I had a habit of turning on the anger machine and then blaming them for it being turned on. And my life started to change. The next thing I saw was that my wife and I truly were living in separate realities. We were not experiencing the world in the same way. Oh, we had, if you did those Venn diagrams, we had some overlap, or we wouldn't have been together. But there was a tremendous part of her Venn diagram and mine that did not overlap. And for 10 years, we had argued about who was right over and over and over again. And then we wondered why our feelings of intimacy and even our sex life went to hell in a handbasket, right? Because we were making things more important than the love that we had for each other, that had no business being more important than the love we had for each other. And what happened for me, and I won't say, I'd like to say it happened like that, but what happened for me incrementally was I did more listening and less talking than I had in the past. I know for those of you that have known me even a little or heard me speak, that might be hard to believe, but I can listen. And I started listening, and I listened in a different way. I started listening to my wife and to my children, my adolescent children at the time, as they got bigger. I started listening to truly understand what they were seeing that I wasn't seeing. And I sometimes would be more or less successful than others to understand what they were seeing, but I always saw that it was different from what I saw. And I had respect for their eyes that they were seeing what they saw and I was seeing what I saw. And it seemed like when the feeling was right, when we returned to the feeling of true unconditional love for each other, it seemed like our eyes often saw much more similar than we did when we were lost in upsetting thinking. So that started to change my relationship with my wife, which was very very powerful. And it changed my relationship with my children. I get a review, even now as a retired physician, I get a review every month of 16 articles in psychiatry and 16 articles in family medicine. Now, the psychiatry I've had since it started in 1975. So for 45 years, every month I've been getting 16 articles for 45 years in psychiatry, which has kept me up. And for the last 18 to 20 years, I've done the same with family medicine, because I was so interested in the mind-body connection. And I say this because I saw in this month's family medicine that 52% in the United States, parents were still spanking their children. And it showed the increased incidence of behavior problems, whether that was started at 1-year-old, 3-year-old, and even at 5 years old. And then the behavior problems that child increased incidence that child had down the road. And I is innocent, because I remember my daughter she was probably 7, and it was shortly after I met Sid, and she had hit her brother, who was 5. And so I was spanking her, and I started, and I think I might have hit her bottom like twice. And I said, it suddenly came to me, this is crazy. This is crazy. All I'm teaching this child is that the biggest person gets to do the hitting. That's all I'm showing. And then wondering why she would be fearful of me or have resentment towards me. And I vowed, and I never did. I never hit a child in anger after that. And it's innocent. I was spanked many times, and I often tell people I earned every one of them. And I understand that. My father was doing the best he could with a mischievous youngster who seemed to be rebellious often. As I went through my life, I had a number of, we could sit here for hours and I could tell you stories, but I remember one of them with Clyde T. Mills, who was working with me for a year. She was a nurse practitioner, psychiatric. And it was during the time she was with me that she started dating Dr. Roger Mills and was married to her, got married to her. But Clyde T. was making rounds with me at the hospital. And this man had come in over the weekend when I was on call, and he was in a full-blown manic episode. And I think this clinically has a lot of stories in it, a lot of gifts. So he was in a full-blown manic episode. He was a man, he and his wife had moved from up northeast down to Florida, and his business didn't go well, and she lost her job, and that he was so frightened by economy. He had 2 beautiful children, 2 boys, 9 and 11, and he'd gone into a full-blown manic episode. And he had been awake for like 40 hours when he came in, and he was going so fast. I remember doing his physical workup, and he was telling me he saw the devil in me, and I just sat with him, and I started him on some medicine. And some of you may have heard this, because a number of my clinical stories are on a series of tapes called One Cause, One Cure that I did for Elizabeth Lovius in England. And we have them on our website, and they're on YouTube, a lot of them. And I have stories of hope, addictions, stories of hope, anxiety disorders, stories of hope, psychotic disorders, stories of hope, trauma disorders, stories of hope, addictive personality disorders. But so this man was in a full-blown manic episode, and he was so sped up that they had him in a room overnight, and they brought him from all over the hospital. They brought magazines for him to tear up. And so literally through 12 hours, through 8-10 hours through the night, he had been tearing up magazines. And I'd started him on some, back then in 1985, Haldol, 5 milligrams 4 times a day. And I came in the morning making rounds with Clytie Mills, the nurse, my nurse practitioner, and the head nurse on the unit. And he was ripping these papers up, and he was talking 250 miles an hour. And I don't know what move. Well, I do. I know there is a spiritual guide. You can call it the divine thought system. You can call it whatever you want. It's what guides my lemon tree in my backyard. The two main differences between the lemon tree and me is, number one, I have more mobility. And number two, I don't have to follow the divine thought system if I don't want to. I can fold my arms and do it my way, regardless of how much pain it causes me. I don't think that lemon tree has that choice. It's already, a few of the green ones are starting to look a little yellow. They won't be ready till March, but they're doing their job. It doesn't look like the tree has folded its arms and said, "Make me." So as I was with him, I was quiet. I wasn't frightened because of what I knew. What I saw was, I saw a human being who was perfectly mentally healthy, but just didn't know it. I tell you, as a psychiatrist, how beautiful that is, rather than seeing a sick person that's damaged or broken. And because of that, I spoke to that. And I ended up saying something kind of silly like, "Fred, it looks like he's got papers, because he's been tearing up these magazines from all over they're up above his knees, the pile. It's almost covering the room." And I said, "Fred, it looks like you've been doing a lot of heavy reading here." Well, he got tickled. The nurse got tickled. And he stopped. It was early in the game for me. I was not used to having things like this happen. But he stopped. And it wasn't the words as a technique. I'm sure it was the feeling where I was talking to and the way I don't know. But he stopped, and he stopped talking 300 miles an hour, and he started talking to me. If any of us were in a conversation right now, we started having a back and forth conversation that was no faster than I'm talking with you. And we walked out of the room, and this little nurse, her name was Grace. She was kind of short, stocky lady. She was a good nurse, and she cared for people, but she was a little bulldog. And she pulled me in the other room, and she said, "What just happened in there?" And I said, "Well, Grace," I said, I think he came out of his manic psychosis." "Well, that's impossible." And I said, "Well, since my answer didn't seem to satisfy you, do you want to tell me what you think happened in there?" "Well, I don't know." I said, "Well, then I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go with my appraisal, since you don't know and I do have a pretty good idea of what happened. And I'm going to stop his Haldol and all of his psychiatric medication." She said, "You can't do that." And I was pretty kind. I really do think I was. I kind of had thoughts come pretty rapid that I could, but I waited for about 30 seconds and I said, you know, Grace, I think that MD behind my name and that I'm licensed in this state gives me the right to stop the medicine if I don't think it's needed anymore. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave some medicine as what we call a PRN, right? The Latin per rem necessarium. If it's necessary, he can be given this medication. But I want to be clear about this, Grace. And I got quiet, not stern, but I was clear. I said, Grace, I want that medicine given if Fred needs it, not because you or one of the other staff needs it. Do you understand? Well, yes. I said, okay, that's all. So I came back the next morning and he had not been given any all day or in the evening, but the nighttime nurse, even though, or before he went to bed, because she hadn't even given him she, you know, was not privy. I mean, it had lost in any way. It gave him one dose, but he was fine. That was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Wednesday, he wanted to go home, and I hadn't seen things like this happen, but he'd been fine since that Monday morning conversation. And his daughter had come down from the Northeast, his 28-year-old daughter, and she said, Dad wants to go home. And I said to her, I said, well, what do you think? She said, Dr. Pettit, I've talked with him for 3 hours. He's the healthiest I've ever seen him in my entire life. He's fine. I said, let's do it. So we discharged him Wednesday evening, and I made an appointment for Friday at 3, and for them to come back. And I gave some little 2 milligram tablets if he needed them. And we didn't have cell phones then, but you could call me. I'm on call. So Friday, that was Wednesday evening. So Friday at 3 o'clock, he and his wife come to the appointment. Now, some of you may have heard this. Have you? Oh, yeah. Anyway, I'll tell it. So they came to the appointment, and he looked wonderful, and his wife looked like hell. And I said, how are you doing, Fred? And he said, you know, I'm doing great, Doc. He said, I'm sleeping like a baby. He's on no medicine. I'm sleeping about 8.5 hours. I feel good. I feel a lot of energy. And he said, you know, I said, well, at night, don't you have some of those thoughts about worrying about finances? He said, well, yeah, I still have a few of those come into my head. And I said, well, what do you do with them? He said, well, I count them. Hell, they're as good as sheep. And then I fall asleep, usually within 15 minutes. He said, because I know it's because my mind is quieter, I've already seen 2 solutions to our financial problems because I'm not thinking about the problem, and the solutions have been given to me, and we're going to be fine. So I look over at his wife, who does not look really well. And I said, Marianne, how are you doing? She said, I'm doing horrible. So I haven't slept since Joe came. His name was really Joe. I said, since Joe came home, I haven't slept. And I said, how come? Well, I knew how come. You know, like lawyers are taught not to ask a question that they don't pretty sure what the answer is going to be. So she said, well, I've been worrying about Joe. I said, really? I said, what have you been worrying about, Marianne? Well, I've been worrying that he got well too fast. You know, all my friends say nobody gets well that fast from being in a full-blown manic episode. And of course, we didn't have the internet like we do now, or it would have been even worse probably. But she said, everybody tells me he's got a flight into health and then he's going to crash and get sicker than he was before. And I said, really? I said, what would you be doing? I got quiet and I said, what came to me? I said, what would you be doing if he was still in the hospital? She said, well, I'd probably be worrying that he wasn't getting well fast enough. I said, really? And I started laughing and she got pissed. Pardon me, but she did. And she said, Dr. Pettit, I love my husband. And I said, I know you love your husband. I know you do. But I'm going to suggest to you something that might at first be strange to you. So what's that? I said, well, I'm going to suggest to you that worry has 0.0 to do with love. And 100% to do with insecurity and lack of understanding of what's available. What are you talking about? I said, well, to me, I'll tell you what love means to me. Love means having a peaceful, light heart and all my resources available to the people that I love. That's what love means to me. And if and when I get caught up in paying attention to worrisome thoughts, one of the first things that goes is my peace of mind. And then my ability to think clearly, my thoughts start getting muddled. I can't see beyond the problem to the solution. I start having trouble with my sleep. In fact, worry is what initially got Joe into that full-blown psychosis that he's come out of. And it stopped her because she saw that it wasn't speaking from judgment. She saw the neutrality of what I was saying and the truth. And she said, wow, I always thought worry showed that I cared. And I said, well, if showing you cared for somebody while you were taking a knife and inflicting yourself with wounds was caring, because that's worry. If I ever invent anything, I told her, I said, I'm going to find out who marketed worry, because they are damn good. Because they have marketed the most destructive habit to people's physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being as a badge of courage. And she said, I see, that's true. And I said, would you like to learn something about this? And she said, yeah. And I said, Herb, do you want to learn further what you've already started to see? And he said, yeah. So they came to 8 sessions of group that I did, and I saw them at the end of it individually, and they were fine. Things like that happened over and over. Some of you know the story about them, and I can send it to Christian if I haven't already sent it. A woman, when I was at West Virginia, and I can stop. Shall I stop after this story and take questions, Christian?
Yeah, except I have just one question. When you are finished with this, I just have one question with regards to the paper you shared with us regarding euthymia.
Okay, euthymia. Okay. Do you want me to stop now? I can. Either way.
I would love to have the extra one you would.
Okay. Well, again, I know some of these, if you've watched some of those tapes, they're on there, but this was dramatic because I had covered on this was at West Virginia University. I was there from 2002 to 2011. And I was the medical director of the Sydney Banks Institute for Innate Health until the economic crash affected our fundraising, and we had to eventually, we used what funds we had and had to leave in 2009. So this was probably about 2006, 2005. And I had covered on I was in the main building of the medical school, and the psychiatric hospital was on the same grounds, but about a 3 to 5 minute walk on the grounds to the psychiatric hospital. And I had covered for one of my colleagues who was on vacation. I had covered for about 2 weeks, and the head nurse, so he happened to be a man, but the head nurse was so touched by, I would give a copy of Sid Banks' The Missing Link to every one of my patients to read. And he was so struck at how many people were deeply impacted by that he got permission. The doctors, even though they did not seem to have any respect for the three principles, they had respect for him, this head nurse. And so they were fine with him doing whatever he felt was helpful. And so he contacted me and asked if I would bring over 20 copies of Sydney Banks's The Missing Link. So I went over and I took the elevator up to the second floor to the adult psychiatric unit. And as I came up to the unit with my 20 books, I looked down, and 15 feet away on opposite sides of the, what do you call the thing that would be between the nurse and anyway, she was on one side and the nurse was on the other side. And how many people have heard this story? Nope. So this woman is in her mid to late 30s. And you could tell that she was has had some troubles, but a very, very beautiful lady. And she was shouting at the nurse saying, "Why won't they just let me kill myself? What's wrong with that? I should be able to just kill myself." Now, she had made many serious attempts. She had had 23 hospitalizations over the last 9 years. She had 2 bachelor's degrees from college. And they were going to send her to the state hospital because they'd become so frequent, the suicide attempts, and so near lethal. And so I came on the unit, and I'm about 15 feet away from her. I haven't met her. I've never seen her before. She's never seen me. I hope it's a healthy pride. I pride myself in doing the best I know to be respectful to people and to get permission if I'm going to say something that, whatever. But I didn't. I'm standing 15 feet away. She's yelling, "Why won't they let?" And my mouth starts moving. I don't know has anybody ever had this experience where your mouth sounds moving and you have no freaking idea what's going to come out your mouth? Well, my mouth started moving, and I said something as close as I can recall. I said, "Ma'am, whatever you want to kill yourself over is over and only exists now as a memory, a thought in your head." Well, she was not happy. And I understand. She started screaming at me like an injured bobcat. If she could get to me, she probably would have, but she didn't. But she said, "You don't know who I am. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know. You have no business, saying," and it was all true. So it just went on and on for at least 2 minutes. And then she'd stop and I'd wait, and she'd have a kind of an afterquake, like earthquakes, and she'd start up again. And finally, I waited 30 seconds, then there was no afterquakes. And I quietly said, "Ma'am, everything you've just said is absolutely true. Absolutely. But what I said was also absolutely true. And I know what you want." She said, "You don't know what I want." I said, yeah, I do. You're like the rest of us. You want to be at peace, and you want to have love available in your heart. to give and receive love. And because of what's happened in the past, you don't believe, and then what you've done in response to the pain that you've experienced from your thinking, you don't think it's possible for you to ever live at peace. And I know that it's much more than possible. It's very, very, very probable that you can live the vast majority of your life at peace. And I walked out. I put the books down and I walked out the door. I heard later that within 10 seconds, she said to the nurse, "What do I have to do? What do I have to do to see that man when I get out of here?" People know that they're whole. They just have to be reminded of it. They know that they're, as you were saying earlier, they know that they're perfectly meta, Louise. They know. They have to have somebody who acknowledges it and speaks to it. And hope got awakened for her that day. I didn't think of it as a metaphor that day, but it created a crack and the light started to come out. And when her mother came to visit, her mother is interviewed. You can go on YouTube even, and there's an interview with Judy Sedgman, me and her mother. And her mother said, when I came to visit that afternoon, she said, "Mom, I think I met somebody today that can help me." Now she had gone to the top traumatologists in Boston and a big trauma center in Morgantown, renowned in the United States. And all these people did was take her back into the past and eventually told her that she was traumatized for life and that she should go on disability and stay there for the rest of her life because she was injured by the thing that happened to her. So I could keep going. I mean, one of the other dramatic ones very quickly was, some of you have heard too, but it was a young woman with 2 degrees, and I've got her testimonial too that I could send to you, Christian. It's called "I'm Not So Broken," and she was in her 5th psychiatric admission in 7 months. She was 26 years old. She was married. She had a 6-year-old child. She was a certified nurse assistant, and she was fully, again, incredibly in a psychosis, a manic psychosis. She'd been awake for 40 some hours. She was on 2,100 milligrams of lithium and 800 milligrams of Seroquel, quetiapine. And she was still talking 300 miles an hour, 270, whatever. And I asked permission from her if she could stop for just 60 seconds and let me say something. After I sat for 3 or 4 minutes just trying to make some sense of her gibberish. I couldn't. And she stopped, and I said to her, "You are perfectly mentally healthy, Molly. You just don't know it. You've gotten caught up in some negative thinking. It's affected your physiology. It's even affected your genes, turned on some genes that make it even difficult for you to express what you're trying to say in a way that's intelligible, but you are perfectly mentally healthy." Fast forward 6 months, she's in nursing school, fast tracking to become an RN. She's a master's degree in nurse practitioner. And so 6 months later, I present her at Grand Rounds. She used to have terrible eating disorder, panic attacks, et cetera, et cetera. And she's very calm. She sits there as I tell the story, and she's doing fine now. And she's off all 800 milligrams of Seroquel, and she's gone from 1,800 down to 300 milligrams of lithium. And one of the residents asked her, they said, "What did you think when Dr. Pettit said to you in the midst of your full-blown manic psychosis that you were perfectly mentally healthy?" A good question, right? Really good question. All the nurses, the social workers, the faculty, psychiatrists, the head of the department are there. And she said, well, the first thought I had when he said that was, oh my God, they have given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. That is funny. It's not only funny, it's brilliant. Think about that. It's brilliant. In the midst of her full-blown psychosis, I say that and she goes, shit, that is really crazy what he just said. Well, you can't be that crazy if you can recognize craziness. What she recognized with what I was saying was totally outside of what people would say was true. But then she said to the young man, the resident, she said, you know, that was my first thought. But right after it came another thought from a different place. And that thought was, I know what he just said is absolutely true. I knew what he just said was absolutely true. The first thought was from her brain. The second thought was from her soul, her side of consciousness. And that started her on her journey. I'm about to reconnect with her. We're just in the process of getting reconnected. So I'm going to stop there, and I could tell stories, people that had obsessive compulsive disorders, people that had addictive disorders, people, because peace of mind cures everything in that 300 and 600 page book. Peace of mind is curative. Now, it can't cure the computer. You can have brain damage, but you can still have peace of mind. I'll end with the last story of my sister who I lost to COVID about 4 months ago. She was 6 months older than I, 15 months older than I. And she had been on a dementia unit for 8 years, even though she was only 15 months older than I. And I think a lot of it was because in 1986, she and her husband came down to visit us in Florida from Connecticut with their 16 and 19-year-old daughters. And both of her daughters were killed by a drunk driver that while we were there. And I, in my own mind, and there's no judgment, I mean, because talk about a challenge to peace of mind and knowing that you have a healing, you're given everything that you have to heal from anything. Like Elsie Spittle says, to the deeper you see the principles, you know that you will be given to be okay no matter what. And it allows you to not go through life with fear and to face whatever happens. But last November, when we were getting ready to go to Denmark, to Norway to speak at the Viva conference, we stopped off in Connecticut to see my sister. And I had a sense that it was the last time I would ever see her. And as we were ending, for 2 days, she talked gibberish. She was funny and laughed. We laughed, but she made no sense when she talked. And she had no memory of if something happened 2 minutes ago and she had no memory of it. But we had a wonderful visits for 2 days. And as we were leaving, my wife, Linda, took my sister's face gently in her hands and said, "Peggy, it's all right, isn't it?" She wasn't speaking to her brain. She just said very quietly, "Peggy, it's all right, isn't it?" And my sister, Peggy, looked at her and said, "Linda, it's really all right." It's really all right. And she gave my wife a soft kiss on the lips and said, "I love you very much." Now, this is somebody who had severe dementia and had not said one intelligible word for 2 days. So I went to her as we were saying goodbye, and it was my turn to say goodbye. And I said, Peggy, she was my older sister, right? And she kept me out of trouble as much as she could, you know? And I said, Peggy, do I have permission to kiss you on the cheek? And she said, of course. So I kissed her on the right cheek, right? But I very quickly, without permission, kissed her on the left cheek. And I said, well, I realized I didn't have permission to kiss you on the left cheek. Was that okay? And she looked at me. She said, Billy, it was perfect. The soul cannot be scratched. It cannot be injured. We are whole. It's important to know that when you sit with people. And even if those of you that have a copy of Dear Liza, I encourage you to reread the last letter. Somebody read it to me recently. The last letter of Dear Liza, it's on page 273. It's not in the Kindle version. Somehow it got lost from the Kindle. It's only in the hard copy. And it's very beautiful because it basically says, Liza, there will be people that will not seem to that kindness, that they don't deserve kindness and compassion because of their behavior. But they are the ones most in need of it. And if you can find the place in your heart to do that, your kindness may be the light that brings them back home to their own mental well-being. I try to remember that. So let me see if I can really stop my talking and listen.
Well, Bill, the question is, I'm sitting in this beautiful feeling, and I have a hunch that the whole community is listening to you, all 59 of them are doing exactly the same. So my suggestion is really to leave it at that, because I think it's been perfect. And unless I hear protests from the rest of the gathering here, I think that this would be a perfect place to stop. It has been beautiful, really.
You know, sometime if we want to do something again, just for questions, we can do that. I would do that. What you people are doing is so beautiful and so innovative. And I've told Christian that if 35 or 40 other countries that have pockets of Three Principles people, if they could do what you did, and I am encouraged, Christian, to have somebody send your book to the World Health Organization, the Mental Health Department. But if they received transformative stories from 35 countries around the world, that these principles have made this difference, there would be some millions of dollars freed up for wonderful research and could move this forward faster. It could, just like the Berlin Wall came down 10 days after it was predicted it would be up for another 100 years. If that ever happened, if people were doing, if you could facilitate other countries to do what you've done, and that could be brought to the World Health Organization, I think this wall could come down and the world could change in a very short period of time.
Can I just ask you?
Sure.
Would you send the testimonials you've got here? Which you talked about the testimonials, or you had if then I'll pass it on.
Wonderful, they're wonderful, and both of them have their names on it, and both of them said I could only share it if I shared their full name.
Okay.
Okay. I will do that. I guess Nicole said that. I don't know if Molly has her last name on it, but Nicole said, Nicole Citrangelo, good Italian name. She said, you can only share it if you share my full name.
But we will definitely take you up on your promise to re-enter the Zoom room at a later stage. We would love to have you.
Good. Thank you, folks.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure to see your beautiful faces. And you've been really with me. I felt that.
Okay.
And love to Linda.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Can you unmute people so we can say goodbye?
Yeah.
Is that possible? No.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's great. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay.
Wow.